So today I am talking to Neill. Hey Neill, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. So before we get into the questions, can you just tell us a bit about who you are and what brings you joy?
What brings me joy? Love that. So let's start with who I am. My name is Neill Springle. I am originally from St. Patrick's in Grenada. I have lived in New York City for the 2/3 of my life. Essentially, I live in Atlanta, Georgia right now. And I've kind of been back and forth in terms of growing up in Grenada and New York. But again, most of my time has been in New York, but I am still very, very connected to Grenada. And what brings me joy in relation to this topic that we're talking about now, visiting home and just being able to hit the beach as soon as I get off the plane. Like, I love that. The little things like that bring me joy. Being able to lay on the beach and not be surrounded by a bunch of people, you know, like just have the beach to yourself. Things like that give me joy. Space, nature, sun, sea, and sand. Sounding like a tourism commercial, but that's what brings me joy.
Sounds like a pretty perfect combination. And yeah, that thing of crowded beaches, I never understand how people can lie on crowded beaches once you've experienced what you have in the Caribbean. But yeah, completely understand. So tell me a bit more about growing up in Grenada. What was that like? What are some of your
All right,
memories?
so I went to New York City when I was six and a half, seven. That part I don't remember. Excuse me. That part I don't remember too clearly. I do remember maybe like maybe up to a year before I left. You know, just kind of like the really happy home I was living in, and it was cool to just kind of be surrounded by family, extended family, of course. You know, the Caribbean. So I joined my parents in New York, and then I was sent back because my mom thought I was being a bad teenager. You know how that goes. I'll be honest with you. In the first 2 years of being back home, I hated it because I was so Americanized. I had been, at that point, Grenada has been almost wiped clean from my system. And it took me about 2.5 years to really appreciate the beauty of home. Like, for example, growing up in inner city Brooklyn, I'm sure it could be a little similar in inner city London in certain places. Like the fights in school, people robbing you of your sneakers and your jacket, things like that. I love the beauty of being a child and being a young person and having the freedom to just exist without the extra layers of the metropolitan lifestyle. Like, we weren't as material. I love the fact I hated the uniform at first, but then over time it was like, I don't have to worry about what am I wearing every season, you know, when you go back to school. So in terms of growing up, I enjoyed things like going and, as we say, cutting crayfish, going in the river to, you know, get crayfish, just being able to go up in the mountain and grab fruits and things like that. I love the fact that I can just eat naturally. Like now, it's funny, I have an American friend who loves his fruits cold, like coming out of the fridge. He's American, straight up American. He thinks I'm crazy because I'll take a fruit out of his fridge and I'll put it down on the counter and I'll let it like get back to room temperature. Because in my head, that's how you're supposed to eat a fruit. Like, you're not eating mangoes coming out of the fridge. So, so little things like that. It was a little trying at first because, again, I was so Americanized, but over time I got to enjoy the peace, the quiet. I was able to read so much because I wasn't preoccupied with so many other things of being busy. And yeah, and I found friendships to be a lot more genuine. And yeah, just overall, you felt more at peace. The slower pace, you kind of can enjoy life on a day-to-day basis versus always needing to be rushing off to doing something and being somewhere. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds pretty idyllic. And so in terms of the experience of going to school in New York and going to school in Grenada, aside from like the simple things like not getting beaten up and robbed, what are the differences? Because like in my head, and like this is totally based on like assumptions, more or less, but in my head, like school in Grenada seems like very like regimented, very strict, very like set. I mean, I'm sure things have changed since the days that you were in school, but what was that like? Was it very different from the style of learning that you experienced in New York?
Yes, in New York, Honestly, because the schools were so crowded, there were just so many kids, like you didn't get that much attention from the teachers. In Grenada, it was a little bit more personal. Also, the communal factor of Grenada, even though as a teenager you resist it and you don't like the fact that your teacher lives just around the corner and they know your parents, eventually you learn to appreciate that because it's easier for them to know who you are as a person. And so if you have a good relationship with that teacher, not saying you can't have that in the bigger metropolitan cities, but I think it felt more intimate in Grenada. It felt more closer and close knit. So I enjoyed the relationship I had again with the teachers and my fellow students. In New York, it wasn't as cohesive. It was very much, it was almost like you felt like you were sheep that were wrangled into a pen for a certain amount of hours, and then the pen let out and it's just a bunch of sheep just headed back to wherever they sleep. You know what I mean? So whereas in Grenada, it felt organic, it felt close knit, and yeah, it kind of fed my soul a little bit more versus New York, which wasn't quite the same.
Yeah. And so where did you go to school in Grenada?
MacDonald
I
College.
really, wow, I know
Yes,
that
yes,
place.
yes.
Huh, cool. And so what did you do when you finished? What did you want? Did you know what you wanted to do when you left?
So the funny thing is, my mother sent me home, unfortunately and fortunately. The unfortunate part is because I wanted to be a graphic artist. I was really, really good at
No,
sketching and
that's
designing and things like
terrible
that.
that you got sent away for something as minor as that.
Well,
Wow.
it was more like the dynamics of the relationship. You know, she's very Caribbean and here I am Americanized. So, you know, like, and also cultural differences and age difference, generational. But yeah, I wanted to be a graphic artist. My mother sent me home, but funny enough, my first job out of MacDonald College was selling encyclopedias. I think that was probably the last period when people actually sold encyclopedias. I didn't do that for very long. I didn't enjoy it, maybe about 6 months. And then eventually I took part in an art competition, which I did not want to take part in because honestly, I lacked a lot of self-esteem. I didn't feel confident. Not my family, but my best friend at the time, his mom encouraged me to take part in the competition. And I was like, man. Guess who won? I did. And from winning that competition, I got a call at home, and it was some guy from a company called Signs and Designs. It was a graphic arts company. And he was like, do you want a job? I'm like, I'm still in school. He's like, oh, well, when you're done with school, let us know. So I didn't go straight to him. I did the encyclopedia thing. And then eventually I was like, you know what, I can't do this salesman thing. And then I called, and then, yeah, worked as a graphic designer for a year. Yeah. And eventually moved on to something else after that. So, yeah.
Okay. And so what pulled you back to New York? Why did you not stay in Grenada?
Really good question. I did not actually have a conscious decision. Like the need to get back to New York, that was kind of worn out of me, you know, after about 3-4 years of being in Grenada. I stayed in Grenada for 6 years. My parents decided they want me to come back. So, you know, that was kind of like, you just do what your parents say. They want to take me back to New York. I went back to New York. So yeah, in 1996, I returned to New York City. Yeah.
Cool. And you're an actor, is that correct?
Correct.
Interesting. Did you and how did you I mean, you wanted to be a graphic designer, you ended up being an actor. How did that transition?
How did that all tie in? So post me being fired from a graphic design job,
Nice.
when you're young and, you know, headstrong, yeah, you know how that goes. I eventually started working in what is now Sandals. It used to be called La Source. And I worked in the spa. So I learned massage therapy. And funny enough, I'm British certified, funny enough, through that program. And I met a lot of actors and models, and they'd come in and they'd be like, oh, you would be great at it. You should think about doing that. And I'm like, you know, in the Caribbean at home, I'm like, don't care about any of that. So returned to New York, tried finding a job. I couldn't really find anything substantial. And I was like, let me try this modeling thing. So I went to a couple agencies. I went looking like this almost. And they were like, I remember one specific agency, they said to me, your look is too editorial, meaning my features are too strong. So I was like, all right, whatever. eventually found a job, but then I still had some interest at this point. I was like, how can I shift? So what I did is I grew my hair out back then, the whole Maxwell moment, and they loved that. I went to an agency within a week. They called me back and they were like, here, we'd like to sign you. And from there, I started doing a lot of commercial modeling, and that was where I had most of my success. And eventually, as you age, it's almost a natural transition to get into acting, because now you're doing commercials and now you're getting lines in commercials. And that's how I transitioned into acting.
Cool, 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 cool. So I want to follow up on the whole acting bit later on, but I guess focusing specifically on this issue that I keep on returning to in these interviews of relocation and what prompts people to move and what the journey is to getting there. I'm super curious. What has it been like for you? I mean, I'm going to call, do you define yourself as a Grenadian American, or how do
Yes, yes, strong yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What has it been like for you as a Grenadian American in this year of relative total insanity? What has it been like being a bystander to everything that's going on in America, knowing that you're not fully from there?
Two things. Anxiety, of course, because you don't know what's happening. And again, the metropolitan cities' life is so sophisticated. There's all these bills, as you know, all these things you have to be concerned with. Home, it's a little simpler. So it has put me in the mindset of reassessing whether I need to be here. Because honestly, my job at the time, I had a really good job. I actually had hot water in the early 90s. This was big then, like people at my apartment, people didn't have that. And so when I look back and I think about those things, I'm like, I really didn't need to leave, but I left because my parents, wanted me up here. But in regards to now, it again makes me reassess whether we need to be in these bigger countries. What is the trade-off, I ask myself. So I am surrounded by a lot of West Indian Americans. And the one or two Grenadians that I keep in contact with, who I'm really close to, we have similar feelings. We feel like the stress of racism, just the ultra hyper violence that occurs in the U.S. society, the actual cost of living here, these things may not necessarily be worth it. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is what makes me feel a little bit more secure is the fact that I do have some place to go to, unlike my true African American friends. So in some ways I do have an exit strategy. If life is too difficult here, I can head home. So in some ways it's a good and it's a bad.
Cool. And so one of the things I'm quite curious about is that most of the people that I have conversations with who would even consider moving to Grenada tend to be people who are first generation, people who were born in Grenada, but who happen to be here. My cousins are like, no way, hell no, I'm living in Grenada, like, which is sad, I think. But even with the people who were born there seems a difference in some way, because tell me how you see it, but it seems as if you were born there, to move back, you kind of need to be quite far ahead. Do you see what I mean? I mean, I think for me, I can just rock up and be a bum on the beach and no one's going to know who I am. But as someone who was born there, do you feel a need to have quite a lot in place, or questions about status, or what's it like as a first generation? What are some of the hurdles or challenges that you're going through when it comes to assessing whether or not you move back? That's a very long-winded question.
Really good question. For me personally, as an individual, I don't feel like I need to have a lot, because again, coming from my background, I'm going to be blunt. I grew up poor, and so I do have a certain retention of that period in my mind. So when it comes to certain amenities and certain things, I can live without those things. Yeah. Can you hear me? Oh, yeah, because you were free. Yeah, you froze for a second. We can hear you. So yeah, I don't think I need to have too much in place, because I still have family there. I still have siblings, as well as, multitudes of cousins and whatnot. I do think that it is a little bit more difficult for people like me to a certain degree, especially when you've been away for a very long time, because again, we have such a high immigration rate. A lot of people just leave. So when you go back, a lot of people that you knew are no longer there. So in some ways, I think the most difficult part would be your social circle. Where do you connect and who do you connect with if they're not there? You know, a lot of these little kids, as we say, snot-nosed kids, I saw back in the days running around in little underwear. Now they're grown men and women, and each generation of my, colleagues are gone. So I think that would probably be the most difficult aspect of repatriation. Yes, just the social aspect, yeah. But the
Yeah, and
physical infrastructure, Grenada gives me everything I need, so yeah.
yeah, and so if you were to move back, where would you be based in St. George's? What would you do?
Such definitely, because I like the juxtaposition of country versus town. I personally, I'm slightly antisocial, slightly. So I realized I'm an ambivert, which is something I just learned 2 years ago, meaning a combination of introvert and extrovert. So I like being on, but I want access to some place where I can be off. So with St. George's, I feel like it is town, it's always on, whereas such as is the country, I can chill and turn it off. So I'd definitely be in Suttez.
Yeah, good answer. And so what do your friends and family think about the idea that you're even considering moving back? Because like your podcast, which is amazing, everyone should check it out, Double Bind. In the most recent one, some of your friends who are African American were like, hell no, why would we leave the US? Like, why would we go to somewhere that's like a developed country? What do your friends and family think of the idea of you moving away?
The only person I've shared it with is my sister. Well, actually, no, I did tell my mother briefly, but she didn't really address it. My sister is supportive. She's also considering, excuse me, an extended move, if not a permanent move. I was almost about to give a bit of her personal business. Let me hold that. But she is considering, keyword, just considering a possible permanent move, because she's also feeling the same things I'm feeling. It's kind of exhaustive, and she lives in New York, which is just, again, totally different beast. London is very similar, but I will say London, you guys are still a little bit more human. And what I mean by that is New York, we're very disconnected. So people approach you and speak to you very direct, almost rude. The social aspect, like if you're in a fight and someone knocks you out and I'm on my way to work, the typical New Yorker would just keep it moving. I feel like in London, someone may stop and help you. I
Wow,
mean, someone
that's
will in New York at
hardcore.
some point, but I'm just saying, you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, so the social aspect, it's just draining. It's draining. So, and I feel like my older sister is also feeling that. So within her family, her immediate family that she's created, she's considering a possible move as well. Yeah. But
Yeah,
my
that's
mom, I
cool.
don't think they're good. Yeah.
She wouldn't move back?
Well, so they're retired, my parents, and so they normally would do like 6 weeks home and then come back, and they kind of go back and forth. So for them, I think it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad thinks I'm absolutely insane to move. He's like, why? Why would you do that? It's really interesting how he was born in Grenada, but he's still, yeah.
So I'm going to throw a question back at you, because this is something I think. So speaking of, I'm assuming with your dad's generation, I think a lot of them associate Grenada with a lot of lack, because the time period they left, or the time period they knew it, there was a lot of things we just didn't have. So I think maybe that's why he might think you're crazy. Do you think
Yeah,
so
I
or
think he
not?
generally thinks I'm crazy. But like he left when he was about maybe 7 or 8, and
Okay.
I think he just thinks there isn't a lot of opportunity in Grenada, which is true. There isn't a lot of
Yeah.
opportunity in Grenada. But I think I'm also at the stage in my life where, like, I've gone to university, I've worked for the organizations that I want to work for, and what I want is quality of life, which I'm not going to get in the UK. So
Mm,
I guess it's that toss up, isn't it, between like go, earning money and like climbing the career ladder, or
yeah.
yeah, balance. And I think I'm definitely about balance. My gran is like, well, why would you leave an office job and like go and get your hands dirty and work the land? I'm like, gran, what else would you want in life? It's just,
Someone has
yeah.
to do
Right.
it.
And I guess that's the thing. It's like maybe for second generation people like me, you it's kind of a luxury. You've had the chance to get your education and get your connections and build your network. And you have the luxury of choosing, whereas for my dad or for my gran, that wasn't an option. So I do, yeah, I get where they're coming from, but it's still, yeah, it is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And so what would you do if you moved back? What would your plan be?
Really good point, because I was thinking when you mentioned your father saying there's no opportunities, that's a yes and a no, because again, there are so many avenues to create certain opportunities. Grenada is what I love about the internet. It has opened up people's mindsets to certain things, and people are far more sophisticated than they used to be. So in terms of me being back, that's a really good question. I haven't given a huge amount of thought to it, but in passing, I've said, don't laugh at me. So I don't know if you know who Lexanne is, right? She does, yeah, I call her Grenada's Oprah. She laughs when I say that. But I imagine myself going home and creating a show very similar to hers, because I'm into media, I'm into creative work. And again, the internet has opened up the eyes of most of the kids down there and the younger folk, and they are creating some amazing bodies of work. There's Teddy Frederick, there is Missy Chrissy. You know, these kids are talented. They know, you know, they're on it. They're with what's happening. So I would try to embed myself in a community of creatives and just, if not create a show, create the other idea I had. I have so many ideas, Lord Jesus. I wanted to create a soul music festival. So specifically for people into R&B and soul, and just have an annual festival each year. Or if not, maybe like a soul party once a month. We're on like Quarantine Point, and it's open air, and it's maybe underneath the moonlight or in Sea Moon and things like that. So yeah, so it would be something creative, involving people and involving art.
Those both sound great. Grenada is right for a festival, isn't it? I mean, I guess they have the music festival, but yeah, more of them. That sounds amazing.
Yeah,
And
variances. Yeah.
yeah, and also the creators. I think that's the thing about Grenada. There's so much creativity, and I think it's an issue that spans across Caribbean islands. It's not that things aren't happening; it's just the storytelling isn't there. Like, we're not
Yes.
very good at communicating like our brilliance. So to have
Yes.
a show that kind of profiles people who are creating stuff and helps to form those networks, that would be amazing.
Yeah, challenging also, because again, if the culture hasn't had a long lean in of being able to do that, yeah, that's the challenge. Because sometimes they just can't visualize certain things. But yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, I'm imagining, like, you must have traveled a lot. You pick any country in the world to move to. Why move back to Grenada? Why not like move to Ghana or Bali? Why Grenada?
Definitely not Bali. I'm gonna be blunt. I'm pro-black. I need to be surrounded by black people. I mean, forgive me, but you know, for some people may find that offensive. But I am more comfortable when I see people who look like me, and so I don't have to think about who I am. Versus, not saying that you have that in Bali, but yeah. The reason I would choose Grenada is simply because it's home. I don't. So, for example, I am pro-black, but I'm not quite as Pan-Africanist as some of my say African American friends who do think of moving to places in Africa. I'd love to visit. I'd love to connect and commune with Africans. But where I am from, I think it's beautiful enough. I think it is enough. You know what I mean? Versus going to a completely different country where they probably see me as an American. And so I may have the American privilege, but I also may have the American prices and the American sort of victimization, or foreigner victimization, you know, in places. Because I've heard, I mean, forgive me, I've heard, you know, if you're not careful, you can be scammed across the board when you're moving in certain places in Africa. So I like the fact that I can move back to a beautiful country that is accessible to the US, 4 hours away. And I'm familiar with the language, with the culture, and it's not something I have to relearn or re-embed myself into.
Yeah, no, yeah, I get you on that one. Although I'm kind of tempted by Gambia just because it's cheap. I could see myself like living in Gambia for a bit. But before we were talking, you were mentioning a concept that you're kind of thrashing out with regards to Grenadians moving back to the island and housing. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because it sounds great. I've already like put my name down for this plot.
You've already got your plot, huh? Well, so a friend of mine from Victoria, one of my childhood friends, he lives in Toronto, and he, again, the same sort of feeling you have, I have, he has, where we're just discussing, and he's like, yo, I'm over it. Like he said, I'm over the cold, I'm over the stress, I need to get out of here. He was like, if it wasn't for my 2 daughters, I'd probably just be back home. So we were just kind of brainstorming. We're like, well, how could we make that transition easier? Because again, I mentioned moving back socially. Sometimes most of our generation or your colleagues and your friends have moved away. So there aren't that many people you can familiarize yourself with. So we decided that what we could do to facilitate a move back for people who've been away for so long is create a sort of housing development specifically targeting Grenadians or people who are quite familiar with Grenada. So we'll have multiple types of houses, maybe a townhouse, a freestanding house itself, semi-detached houses, row houses, and we'll have them in each parish. So you could, for example, if your family's from St. David's, you could find that development in St. David's versus having to move all the way to St. Patrick's. And so we're looking to ideally create a sense of community for those of us who have left and we've been acclimated to certain things in the metropolitan countries. So you and I could sit and talk about Starbucks because you live right next door versus my cousin who's never left, who's going to be like, what, just coffee? I'm like, no, it's not just coffee. You know what I mean? So yeah, the idea is to create housing development to target Grenadians, first, second generation Grenadians who want to repatriate and also want to be among people who are familiar with the things that they've left. And that's essentially my pitch.
Yeah, I'm sold. Sold.
Well, you can send a check too.
So you take like part payments. And I think it's an amazing idea. And I think there's definitely, I guess each island is doing different things when it comes to the extent to which they engage their diasporas. But is there anything that you feel the Grenadian government could be doing better or more or differently to kind of make it easier for folks to return home? Like one of the things that we mentioned beforehand was you were kind of talking about what Barbados is doing with their the welcome
work from abroad program.
Yeah. But I'm curious as to what you think Grenada could do differently, if anything.
Not so much differently, but I think what they can do is replicate the program that Barbados has, which is allow people to come to Grenada for a year to work, essentially quarantine abroad in Grenada and work from their homes in Grenada. But I think in addition to that program, they can also create incentives, either create job opportunities for those people if they decide to stay, or facilitate development through those people. You know, I feel like, excuse me, I'm sorry. Ooh, my breakfast is coming up. You and I have talked about this. I believe that, for example, even if people aren't Grenadian or of Grenadian heritage and they like the thought of working abroad and they come to Grenada and we had the program running, I like the thought of the possibility of them actually staying to help develop the country. Again, because sometimes people tend to, I find people either over glamorize the Caribbean. They think it's just some beautiful paradise, one, or they underestimate. They think we're some third world country, which is a term I hate. I hate when people also describe my country as being westernized. I'm like, we are in the Western Hemisphere. Our culture is Western. It's not just because we're Black, it doesn't mean that the new world is the new world. All these countries are new. They're all Western per se. So yeah, I feel like that can open up the opportunities for people to maybe see the opportunities and the potential of being in Grenada and creating something and helping us develop the country overall. So yeah, in my head, that's what I think the government should really try targeting.
Yeah. See, I've got some curiosity about that, because for me, I think the Barbados thing is amazing. Like Mia Motley, who's a legend, has been on television over here and it's got a lot of international appeal. But I think Barbados is really different to Grenada. I think Barbados is like quite European and quite service oriented and quite, I don't know how to put it diplomatically.
It's developed. It's more developed.
It's more than that. It's more than that.
It's more British. Is that what you're afraid to say?
A different clientele.
Yes.
Say it's
yes.
Yeah. And I don't know if Grenada really wants that clientele.
Good point. Good
That's
point.
what I'm curious about. You know, I think Grenada is so small and so virginal in some ways that
Yes.
I think there needs to be a lot of intentionality about like what can work harmoniously in that space. And I don't, yeah, because I mean, my thing is, I notice how people talk to me just because I'm British, and I'm like, I've got a Grenadian passport, but they already have like a lot of assumptions about me. And I'm Black and I'm Grenadian, so
Yeah.
the amount of what's the word, uncomfort or discomfort that there might be with people who have never been to the island and don't really have that much interest in its development, just being there and using it as a staging place for 12 months. That could be complicated. What do you think? Am I just being precious? What do you think?
No, not at all. Those are amazing factors to consider, because it is a case in point. I do believe, you know, so you're familiar with the Black travel groups like Travel Noir and whatnot, right? So, I mean, it doesn't have to be Black people, but I, you know, just in my head, I'm just kind of looking at the connectivity of, you know, common culture and common ancestors. I believe if it is implemented in a way like it's a program specifically targeting people who are looking to repatriate somewhere else, so create it almost like an umbrella program. So it's, again, like what I have in mind is specific to Grenadians or people of Grenadian descent. What the government can do is maybe create a program that's broader. And so an extension of what Barbados is doing. So it's like, okay, you are, you know what, the closest program would be the year of the return in Ghana. So if Grenada could implement something like that, like come live here and look at opportunities and come with some investment opportunities and investment ideas or developmental ideas, and see how we can collaborate, you know. But again, the government is the mindset, you know, it's just a little different. Yeah, private capital is probably the best way to go, because you know how it is back home. So
I think so, and I think that's the cool thing, as you say, with the internet, there's so many options, and I think our generation just do things differently. Like, yeah, it would be amazing if the government did stuff, but if we sit and wait for that to happen, we could be waiting quite a long time. So no shade to government.
You'll be calling me like 85. I'm like, oh, they finally did it.
Yeah. I guess everyone does what they can, but yeah, that's not a bus I'm going to be waiting for very long. And what else do I have to ask you? I think that, that covers a lot, I think. Oh, the other thing is your podcast. We should talk about your podcast because it's super cool. What led you to start it? And yeah, I'd love to know the story behind that.
Well, you know, even though I work in marketing outside of the acting, that's kind of where I make most of my money, and that's how I live. Of course, COVID has kind of killed everything, as you know. And so I've always wanted to do something creative. I've attempted several times, but you know, when I was younger, bad choices in my team. And so now with COVID kind of forcing people to reassess their jobs, reassess their lifestyles and things like that, I was like, you know, what can I do? What can I create that doesn't need a lot of infrastructure? And so the podcast, I was like, I have a big mouth. I definitely am opinionated, and I have some amazing friends who are sharp people. So that essentially was the impetus, COVID. And I was like, let me just try this. And then yeah, it just, you know, from one episode, I sent it out to a couple of friends. The response was great. So I was like, let's just continue. And I called it the double bind because, again, I mentioned earlier, I'm pro-Black. And the double bind, when someone is in a double bind, it's a situation where you lose either way. So it's kind of like, imagine being chased by murderers and then you hit a cliff that's 300 feet tall. So do you fight these murderers with no weapons, which you're probably going to die, or do you jump off the cliff and you're probably going to die? So the double bind of being Black is not being able to fully express ourselves. So we have to consider our jobs and the people we work for and offending them. So we censor ourselves. And in censoring ourselves, we lose a lot of our true voice. So that is the double bind of being Black. And that's how I came up with that name.
Interesting. I'm glad. Thank you for that explanation.
Yes.
So, do you think does one escape the double bind in Grenada? Does a double bind still exist there in any way?
Not in the same way. The double bind of living in Grenada would be, the trade-off of certain things you don't have access to in the bigger countries, and also dealing with the mindset of Caribbean people, not just Grenada, because the Caribbean culture is kind of on a broader scale. It's more laxed and more relaxed. So a lot of things don't get done, within a certain space, or certain things don't get precedence because they don't see value in it. So I think that would be the double bind of being in Grenada. Well, yeah, what I had in mind is more specific to the, sort of being Black in more European or white countries and whatnot, white dominated countries versus Grenada. But yeah, you can have a double bind there.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. Neill, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been really fascinating hearing your story, and I 100% hope someone follows up and gives you a wad of cash to make these developments come true.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Definitely,
yeah,
definitely.
it's a really good
And
idea. But yeah,
yeah.
where can people check out your podcast?
So you can find us on Spotify, Anchor FM, YouTube, iTunes. It is called Double Bind, DOUBLE, space BIND, podcast, Double Bind Podcast. I'm getting a little tongue-tied. Yeah, so you can find us on most social media platforms, and same the Double Bind podcast on IG as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.